Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
And today we are joined by... Do what?
Okay, so I've got my microphone here.
Sure.
Because I've got it all, I'm doing some rearranging in my house, some cleaning and decluttering. So I'm kind of got like a makeshift setup right now. My camera's actually on my microphone stand, but it's kind of working. So I leaned into the mic, and then that took me out of frame. I'm taking way too long to explain.
Yeah, you are, because I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, Scott Eggleston, our guest today, who is on the episode. This never happens, I promise, but for some reason, Daniel decided to intervene. But anyway, we're joined by Scott Eggleston today.
It happens.
The Frugal Filmmaker himself. And of course, if you didn't know, we are sponsored by Kapow Comics, located on 4047 East Kill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas. There they have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and of course, special guest appearances throughout the year. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. Of course, hit that notification bell. That way, you're up to date on all future episodes of Podcast 2 for 1, as well as all the cool content we have at 2 for 1 Studios on a weekly basis. Woo! Got it all out. Okay.
Oh, you were like an auctioneer. It was pretty.
I know.
Pretty
yeah. Sometimes I get it out. Sometimes it kind of stumbles out. Anyway, Scott Eggleston. It's been a long time since we've actually talked to each other verbally in years. Actually, you and I went to UCA, and I worked under you for a very small brief period at the equipment room at UCA.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, can you kind of tell our listeners real quick a little bit about your journey as a filmmaker, your website, your YouTube channel, as well as now we're kind of starting your first feature film, correct?
Yeah. Wow. It's kind of been a long journey, I guess. I mean, I started, I've always been kind of a self-trained filmmaker. I grew up in a theater family, and I went to junior college a long time ago. And I was kind of a lazy student. Like, all I took was video production, right? Which is the worst possible. Didn't take general. I'm just going to do whatever I want. And I studied, just video production. Of course, like a lot of people, just grew up loving movies. Very, very American, upbringing. And although when I was really young, I watched Siskel and Ebert when they were on PBS initially, sneak previews a long time ago. And I was just interested in the film clips, and then I started listening to what they were saying after a while. And that's how I kind of got into wanting to be a filmmaker. I think that's where initially it started. And so, like I said, I grew up in theater, and then I kind of transitioned over into movies at first as an actor, but then I did not like seeing myself on camera, so I kind of moved behind. So I was kind of self-trained and messed around. This was a long time ago, like before video was easily accessible to the masses. It was very expensive, and which is why I could do it in junior college. That was really the only place I could make movies. That was also kind of when Super 8 was sort of just going out. I actually bought some Super 8 stuff and kind of fiddled with that, but that was expensive, to develop, and editing was kind of a nightmare. And anyway, so time went on, and I eventually ended up at the University of Utah, where I studied film. This was a long time in between junior college and the University of Utah, but I was able to study there and got my bachelor's degree in film, and my wife kind of supported me as far as just to keep going, go to graduate school, and that's where I ended up at UCA. With her, we actually both went to graduate school at the same time, but I started doing the Frugal Filmmaker when I was an undergrad in Utah, and it was kind of just a way to kind of give back to the film community, because I'd read a lot of blogs and I'd witnessed a lot of things just online where people had done all this great stuff, but they always kind of disappeared like after a year or so. They would just sort of fade into the ether, and so I kind of wanted to do something that would give back a little bit and maybe, kind of propel me forward as a filmmaker. And so I started building these camera rigs. That's kind of what I sort of got famous for initially, was building these camera rigs out of PVC and, pipe and all kinds of flash brackets later on and stuff like that.
I watched one of your videos, and it's weird because I only recently realized that in high school, when I was in my television production class, which was the closest thing we had to film classes in high school, but we had that teacher that really kind of pushed that though too, so we got a lot of film out of it. But yeah, when we were thinking we were going to do at that time the Apple 24-hour film festival that they used to do, and we were going to build this rig and all this cool stuff, and we didn't do it, but it was a cool idea and it was a good video. So
There you go.
We're probably talking about my most popular video is the one, just kind of like a camera cage made out of PVC rig, made out of PVC that you can just grab from all angles, and that's probably the one you're talking about, I imagine. It cost like $5 to make, and so that was pretty popular. But
There was a brief period after you left when I was teaching a few undergrad classes, DF1, DF2, and we used that model to build some PVC pipe camera rigs for the equipment room. So your legacy lived on. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go.
No, it's fine. You know what? And there was a time there, like as an undergrad and also a grad student, where I was sort of like, my goal was to like make a living off of YouTube. Like a lot of people kind of go for that. And there was a time kind of in between, I think, Arkansas and Utah, where because of those rigs that I was building, it was almost like the timing was really good because it was sort of a trend at the time to make these really cheap rigs. Now they all kind of been surpassed by stuff you can buy off the shelf. I mean, it's not that expensive to just buy a lot of this stuff now. You don't have to make as much as you used to. But my popularity kind of spiked really fast, but then it like dropped off just as quickly. I mean, it's the YouTube algorithm is so brutal in that way. You know,
Right.
Things change, and if you can't adapt instantly to that sort of thing, then you're just left in the dust. So I think that's kind of what happened to me. And so I mean, I still make video. I took like a 3-year break actually from doing that because I ended up in Alaska and just was not able to. I actually, in school, your schedule is so flexible. You can do a lot of things. But when I had to get a full-time job, that just made making videos so difficult. I couldn't stay on the same schedule. And so my output was inconsistent. And I took kind of this long hiatus. And I came back sort of recently and started doing some stuff again. But then, of course, I started making a movie, writing a screenplay, and going into pre-production, and that just kind of kills any spare time you might have, especially while I have a family and I have a full-time job here also. And so yeah, so I sort of like I said, everything kind of led me to this point of working on a movie, which is something I'd wanted to do as a filmmaker. That's sort of the end game for everybody, right? Is you got to make a feature. That's what the cream of the crop. That's the ultimate goal. It's the thing we all want to do. That's what we study, right? And
Right, 100%. I think everything that me and Dan, even doing this, which is a different avenue to potentially one day make a feature film. I think me and Daniel talk about it on a weekly basis. So we're right there with you 100%. No, it's awesome. I do want to talk about your movie Bad Bones. Can you kind of, without spoiling it, I know you guys just finished wrapping and that kind of thing, but can you kind of talk about maybe a log line or just a little short synopsis of what it's about?
Yeah, Bad Bones is a story of a paranormal author who moves in. He buys this house with his wife. His wife has a terminal illness, and he believes that the house has some kind of healing properties that could possibly save her life. So that's why they end up at this specific place. And this decision was kind of made without her input. So she's not exactly sure why they're there, but. And of course, in stories like this, things don't go as planned.
Sure. The words Bad Bones give me a hint that it could go not, well. Let's kind of dive into it a little bit. This will kind of tie all into the frugal filmmaker aspect of it and everything else. How long, I know from just your posts on Instagram and talking to you briefly and seeing things, that I know that you, Eric White, Jared Paul Beck, and maybe a few others I'm not familiar with, you guys wrote this screenplay or come up with this idea together. How long did it take you to come up with that idea, and from that inception to projection, or I guess photography?
Well, I had backing up a little bit. I worked on a couple of movies here in Alaska for a guy. I was gaffing for a guy on a couple of his movies, and he had access to all this property like out in the sticks, right? And he leased this property, and he kind of built like a back lot out there. Like he had this compound he'd made, and he's a contractor, so he built living quarters and kind of all these weird structures that he would incorporate into his horror movies, like Wicker Man type statues and just all this stuff. And it was really cool locations. So I worked for him on a couple of these, and I after a while I was like, how come I'm not doing this? It's like, well, one reason is I don't have a bunch of property to build sets on, but what do I have? And so I looked around, and I have a house, and inside my house, underneath my house, is a gigantic crawl space. The crawl space is big enough for me to stand up in. I'm 6'7", and I can stand up in portions of this crawl space. So I was thinking, well, this, crawl spaces are inherently spooky, right?
Right.
So I thought, what kind of movie can I write around that specific location? So I started kicking around some ideas, and I kind of came up with a basic story, and that's when I I enlisted Jared and Eric. I said, hey, I've got this idea. Would you guys mind collaborating with me writing this script? And they said, oh yeah, sure, of course, and they had both worked on my thesis project at UCA. Jared had shot it and Eric had worked on it in various capacities. And so it's interesting because it's almost like, even though that was what, 6-7 years ago or longer, like we immediately gelled again. And it's like we'd never, not talked about movies or anything. And
Is this collection day you're talking about?
yeah, that was my
Okay.
thesis project. And so we probably worked on the outline of this movie probably for a couple of months. We started like December of last year. I think that's when we first met, in the middle of December. And then probably like in February where Jared finally said, okay, you got to start writing now. We've been kicking around this outline for so long, but they helped me quite a bit. I actually wrote every word of the screenplay, but they were very influential in the story and the structure. And if you've ever tried to write something by yourself versus collaboration, I mean, it's like night and day, right? It's like some ideas you thought may have been amazing, you bounce them off people, and they're like, maybe not so much, or how about this take? Or, I mean, they always had great input, and we got along really well, and that's why they, actually, I determined they were, of course, going to come out up here and work on the movie with me. I knew Jared for sure would want to do that because his goal has always been to shoot a feature as a DP, and so anyway, so from probably inception, when we first had the idea in last December, and then we started, probably had 5 drafts later. It was probably, I don't know, March, April, something like that. Probably more like June. I mean, and I had planned a specific time during the summer where my family would be gone, except for my wife. And so that's what we kind of had to nail it. It's like, we're either going to be able to shoot this specific time, or we're going to have to push it until next year. And I really didn't want to push it. I realized that there might be a little rushing going on, but I'm 52 years old, and so I didn't want to, because that'll just continue, right? You push it to next year, and something else happens. Push it the year after that, and year after that. And I really didn't want to do that. Another thing I should mention too is that I met an actor in these shoots here in Alaska in those same 2 movies that I worked on, who's from LA, and he'd been coming here to work for this guy, and so him and I really hit it off. And one reason I wrote this movie, another reason, was that he had said, I'd showed him a short film that I'd made, and I said, hey, we should work together. I'd like to work with you. And he said, that's great. And your short is really good, but it has to be a feature. So he kind of threw down, the ultimatum there. And that was one reason I started thinking about this whole idea, what kind of feature can I make, and so all these things kind of came together to sort of force me to finally get off my butt and, do something that I've always wanted to do anyway. So. Right.
Yeah, no, Eric and Jared are just 2 of my favorite people in general. And Eric actually shot my thesis as well. Oh. And I, even more so than, and this isn't a slight to them, but even more so than my committee, like I would really listen to Eric, because I didn't talk to Jared so much about my thesis, but I did with Eric a lot. And I take everything they say and I listen to them like, hardcore. And I think their advice is invaluable. I do want to talk about, you mentioned this idea of starting with a location first. And I hear this a lot with independent filmmakers, because sometimes people have this bombastic screenplay or this, bigger budget thing in their head. And then they're trying to wrap around finding locations nearby or going to states to find locations that can get really costly. And there's something very frugal about having a location. I know having a location in mind first, and then building the script around that. And I just want to say, was your tendency always, I know you had this location, this idea, but was your tendency always to go towards a horror film with this frugal nature? Because I feel like a lot of filmmakers, they're starting out and do horror because it's so cheap.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I don't know. I've never made a horror film before. But I think that, when you have a location like that, it sort of lends itself. I mean, you're not gonna make a romantic comedy in your crawl space, probably.
But you could. No,
you could. It's probably a harder sell. But I've always kind of been a closet horror fan. I've never been like a really like hardcore horror fan. But I mean, one of my favorite TV shows of all time is The Twilight Zone. When I was a 10-year-old kid, I remember watching that show. It was on PBS Uncut, and I watched it like every night, and I saw all like 5 seasons of it, or 4 seasons of it. And so that was huge. It's interesting because, that show used to be like outlier movies were like Twilight Zone movies, right? Now they're all Twilight Zone movies,
right?
Or TV shows or whatever. So it's clearly a very influential show. But And I sort of like avoided, like I'd made some Twilight Zone stories in the past. I thought, maybe I should, move away from that and kind of get into more conventional commercial stuff. And I said, that's crazy. I love that stuff, So I really leaned into it in this story. I mean, this story has, some horror elements in it, some Twilight Zone elements in it. There's some strong relationship elements in it, which is one thing I've always believed in as a filmmaker, is you got to set up those characters. I don't care what your genre is. It's like you've got to set them up well, because once you put them in jeopardy, if they're not set up well, then the audience won't care what happens to them, and
Sure.
And I feel like we wrote a pretty strong script, and we got some really good actors who, the husband and wife team they have a ton of chemistry, and so I think that I've been really fortunate in that respect to get those elements kind of all working together. I also believe that, like, whatever the story is, if you were to take out all the genre elements, you should still have a compelling story because of those characters.
Right.
So that's kind of what I shot for.
Well, you mentioned, having this location and bringing Jared and them up there. Can we kind of talk about maybe this all ties together, but budget restrictions and maybe how big your crew was, how many cast members you had, and then also, and I feel like, and Daniel is going to hear me repeat this a lot, he's heard it many times, is we're in this certain point of the world right now where we're in a pandemic, right? And so we have COVID going around, and it's changed the landscape completely. So thinking about all these things, budget restrictions, actors, crew, what's all that mean for, making a movie this size, and also how has COVID affected that in any way for you?
Well, first of all, when I was building a movie around this location, and by the way, I've done it both ways. Like Collection Day, my thesis film, I completely wrote with no idea how I was going to do any of it.
Right.
As far as locations and everything like that. And I think there's, advantages and disadvantages to both ways. However, the stress level involved with, like, not knowing how you're going to do something ahead of time is way greater than, I've got this little space I can use. And because the location intimately, like when I was writing the screenplay, I knew every room in this house, and when I wrote about them, it was easy, and I could, much more easily plan in my head what I was going to do because I knew what everything looked like.
Right.
Plus, the fact that I was in a house also meant that I had bedrooms, right? So I could house people here. And the fact that my wife stayed during the shoot also meant she handled all the craft, and stuff like that made for a much less stressful shoot. But as far as, like, total cast members were 5. There's 2 main characters and 3 supporting roles. The 2 main characters came from LA, and the 3 supporting roles I cast here in Alaska. As far as crew, it was myself, Jared, the DP, Eric, who was gaffing. And then we flew them up, obviously, from Arkansas, Louisiana. And then the other crew positions were local, like the audio guy was local. We had like an AC script supervisor, slate person who was local. Costumer was local. A makeup person was local. So there's probably no more than 10 people. Like, if you were to gather them all together, although probably a little more if we had all the cast members, but everybody was kind of, scattered shoot days and everything. We
Sure.
had a 10-day shooting schedule also. So
Pretty quick. I will. There's something you said there that I kind of latch on to. So you said that you wrote this movie and you have the location already here. The rooms inside and out, and I think that really helps a lot with making a horror film, because even if, let's say, you don't have the location or you have a bigger budget, so your canvas is a little larger, you can sit there and you can write a script and you have these beats or these moments that are jump scares, or maybe they're moments of tone or things that are supposed to, create a feeling for the audience member. But having the location already built like that, you can sit there and say, okay, I know where I can put the camera and where I can't put the camera. And so you can kind of start building a shot list while you're writing, right? Because sometimes I find, like, I'm making a horror movie or something like that, I had these great, this will be cool because I can reveal this here, this there. But then you get in the location, this is a Vinny movie, and you're like, damn, like, I can't do that move. And I had planned so much of building a moment with the shot structure that it kind of makes it all dissolve. So can you talk about, maybe did that help with shot design, kind of building into the movie?
Yeah, of course. One thing, no matter how intimate you are with the location, like you say, I mean, there's always going to be compromises, right? Like you think you're going to be able to do it one way, and then everyone shows up, or maybe depending on the situation, like where camera placement and all that, is it going to look like you thought, or there's always, X factors that are going to mess you up. They're not going to make it. Plus time. I mean, I was not as prepared as I would have liked to have been, just because the clock was always ticking, right? And you can't just write and do pre-production stuff all day and all night, because you've got a job and you got a family and you got all that kind of stuff. However, again, working with Jared and Eric beforehand was great, because like one kind of ultimatum I gave him as a director was, I was like, look, one thing I do not want to do, I realize we only have 10 days, right? And that's fast. This is it's about a 70-page script, 71 pages, which is going to be, you typically it's a page a minute, but there's going to be stuff that's going to bloat the running time a little bit. Probably, it's going to be about 80 minutes long, but still, that's a lot of pages. 8 pages a day. Yeah,
it's like double the typical standard, I guess.
Right. But I told Jared and Eric, I said, look, one thing I don't just want to record the script. That's one thing. It's kind of a mandate that I had is, we don't have a lot of time and our money's low, and resources are limited, but let's try and inject some style and do something interesting. Because I don't just want it to be, park the camera and record the actors and, so there was some planning also based on, because, you when you do setups, I mean, that takes time to move things around. And we kind of did some, Kubrickian things where we would light scenes with a lot of practicals. And they actually, Jared and Eric came up with this idea to use like these Wi-Fi bulbs as practicals. Meaning, they could connect to the network and they could actually control the lighting on their phone through an app. As far as
that's literally color. What my green is. Over here.
Same here.
That's one of those.
Okay. That's what we're using. They're
like $30 for 2 bulbs.
Yeah, they're not expensive, and they put them like all through the house and in the crawl space too, and they could easily. I mean, the biggest problem we had with those was sometimes they would lose the
connection. You got to reset them,
especially under the house. Because I didn't have wireless access points everywhere. I had one router.
Sure.
But anyway, things like that, I mean, we sort of had original things like that were created based on the parameters that we were given, right? Which was that we didn't have a lot of time, we didn't have a lot of money, but when you work with creative people, they come up with solutions like that that are great, and that serve the story, and things went pretty well using those bulbs. And we had like a reflector, we had like one C-stand. We had a China ball that we threw, a couple of those lights in, which did a lot of our lighting for the actors. Things that were easily and quickly moved around in the space. So
no, I mean,
so you mentioned budget. So is this did you self-fund the film, or did you do any kind of fundraising? Okay.
No, I did crowdfunding for my thesis film, and I've sworn never to do it again. Because it's just a full-time job, constantly, trying to raise money that way. So actually, when I was working on the script with Jared and Eric, I wasn't sure how we were going to fund this. And what ended up happening was a friend of mine who I'd kind of been working with, he had sort of started a company fulfilling government contracts. And he had come to me later saying, hey, I want to start like an entertainment arm to this. What do you think of that? And I said, great, I have a script right now. I want to produce a movie. Let's talk about it, and so that company was partially like I'm probably putting in like a third of the budget, and they were putting in like 2/3, with the idea that we'll hopefully be able to sell the movie, and then they will make, their 2/3 back and blah, blah, blah. So I prefer that so much better than trying, number one, than finding like other investors outside of sort of my circle of friends, because then you're kind of beholden to them, right? As far as like what you're doing with the money, and that's an added stress level. And I've been in that situation before where somebody else is paying for the project and they don't like what I'm doing or something, and then they essentially meddle with your project, and it's very frustrating. Now, granted, that's the way Hollywood is, right? I mean, you're working for somebody else, and studio gives you the money, and you kind of have to do
Hollywood? Nah, that's not how it is.
So, and I'm actually, like you guys were kind of saying, as far as you want Hollywood to come to you, I'm totally fine with like working on smaller budgeted projects that I have complete control over, versus something that might be bigger that has way too many fingers in the pie. Now, granted, if Hollywood comes to you and says, hey, we want you to make a studio movie, you're going to say no to that,
Right?
Probably
Depends
not.
on the movie. I'm personally probably not going to make Fast 10. Just
I would.
me.
I'd fucking make them
You,
all.
I know you would die. You would die.
Well,
happy.
I think there's something there though. I think Daniel would agree with this. Is that just talking to the people out in LA, all their stories were completely different of how they arrived there at that point in time. It could have been something totally related to film, or something totally not related. And I have this sneaking suspicion that, and this isn't always the case, but if you go out there or go to some of these bigger places and you're trying to work up the ladder, you're still going to have to make that project outside of that ladder to even get to that higher position. Because if you're a good PA, you're going to be a great PA for a long time. Like, no one's going to say, "Hey, you're an amazing PA. What scripts do you have?" I mean, maybe it could happen, but it's just to me less likely.
There's certain people I've known. I mean, John. I don't know if you knew John Hockaday.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, he spent. I stayed on his couch when I was in LA, and he did fairly well pretty quickly. I mean, he went from, just being a PA on Star Wars: The Force Awakens. So not a small job.
What? I don't.
The Star Wars, the Force Awakens.
That one, okay.
The only sequel that came out. I don't know why. They just stopped making them after that. It was really weird. So yeah, and then I mean, by the time when I was out there in 2017, he was at the time working on Detective Pikachu in the art department, but also was hired onto a sci-fi movie to be the main production designer. Oh, wow. Or a sci-fi channel movie, and he went out and did that, and I think didn't have a horrible experience. I think he was like trying to. I mean, he kept getting like no budget kind of situation, but it can happen. But even he got burnt out at that point. And he actually, decided to leave LA and pursue some other opportunities. So like, it's even in the people I'm out there seeing be successful at a fairly fast track. I mean, being there for 2 years and going from PA to production designer seems like pretty substantial track compared to a lot of people, the other stories I've heard. But even at that, he was just, it's the hours, it's the inability to connect with people, either because you don't have time or, there's a certain level of how can we benefit each other versus how can we be friends environment, at least that I encountered out there. Yeah. It almost feels more business-like in your relationships in at times. Anyway, yeah, so I think, I definitely feel like, especially, you mentioned, Scott, that it's becoming easier and easier to be a frugal filmmaker. You're getting to do a lot more with a lot less these days, and that continues to be true with, the Black Magics of the world, and, these people that are, just putting really powerful equipment at really affordable levels. It definitely feels like, even in a place like Arkansas, there's much more of an opportunity to stand out here and to make something, that someone's like, what, how did that come out of Arkansas kind of, reaction, than it would be to try to go in LA and try to stand out, in a city with 10 million people.
Big fish in a small pond kind of thing. Yeah.
And also, honestly, the risk of just the burnout and the kind of lifestyle that is kind of demanded to be successful there.
I do think it also depends on if you want to be a writer, I think you have to go. I think you have to go to New York. You have to go somewhere to write. And it's not impossible to write here. No, it's not impossible, but I'm saying for me.
Dude, when we were out there, I was working at this tiny studio that was managing YouTube stars. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, well, they did have The Rock's Dwayne Johnson's production arm at the time, but this was like way before he was as big as he is now, kind of. So like, they were like trying to find movies for him to produce. That was like kind of their big claim to fame. I mean, they were flying out writers from like New Zealand just to have a conversation, not because they were greenlighting the script or wanted to, hey, we want to buy this. It was like, hey, we just want to talk because we liked this one script. So we just want to have a meeting and, maybe we don't want to do this script, maybe another script. I feel like writing does, I don't know. I feel like that's a pretty accessible anywhere as long as you can get your script into people's eyes that matter.
I think it's a little harder compared to some of the other ones. I think for me, who wants to direct and that sort of thing, I think it would be like you're saying, it'd be easier to kind of make something here and really, have that control that Scott's talking about, and and put kind of all your talent or at least your whatever on the line and try to make something good and hope people watch it. And then try to do the festival route, X, Y, and Z, which I'll get asking you in a second, Scott. I kind of pull back a little bit. I do want to ask you one question. So making a movie, sometimes when I go into it, I think, man, there's a thing here that I know is coming that's going to be super challenging. And it ends up not being challenge at all. So what's something that was you were, not regretting, but you were just like, man, I can't wait to get this day over with. It ended up being super easy. And on the flip side, what was something that you thought would be super easy that would end up being just a pain in the ass?
I don't remember any super easy days.
Yeah, I'm like, wait, I don't have these experiences on set.
Well, I'm not even saying days. I'm talking like, what's this, here, a camera rig, and this will go up easy. And they're like, oh, damn it, don't.
Well, there was one visual effect or special effect, an in-camera effect that we had talked about ever since we started writing this. Like, how are we going to do this? We do it this way, and I can't really tell you what it is because it's like critical to the story, right?
Sure.
But needless to say, we were like debating how to do this the whole time we were writing the script until like we got there, almost until like they got here. And I had ended up going a certain route where I had picked up certain things locally, like Craigslist here, and Facebook Marketplace there, and actually, it actually worked. It was like the last shot of the last thing we shot was this visual effect. And I think it actually turned out pretty good. But as far as like easy stuff, or stuff I thought would be easy that ended up being difficult, was my two actors from LA, Chris Levine and Madison Bullock are their names. They both got here and they immediately got sick. Like they'd contracted something on the plane. It wasn't COVID, but they both got here and immediately they had some kind of serious cold symptoms, like head colds or something, that never went away for the entire shoot. In fact, one of Madison, about halfway through the shoot, completely lost her voice.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine, now what.
Because of screaming?
What's that?
Is it because she was screaming in the script?
Okay. Because of this cold.
Oh, okay.
And she could still talk, actually. But, what we ended up doing was, it's like, okay, we're going to shoot everything we possibly can where she doesn't have to speak, right? With the hope that by the end of the shoot, her voice came back. Well, it never came back. So we ended up having to just record her scenes anyway, with the thought of maybe doing, ADR after the fact, which is what we're going to end up doing for some of the stuff. However, as it turns out, part of her losing her voice, we're actually going to keep in the movie because of certain things that happen. Like, wow, we could actually use that, and that would actually be effective.
Wow.
So, stuff like happy accidents like that are always nice. Granted, we are going to have to ADR some of her stuff because that her losing her voice in the actual story, or her voice changing, would only works like after a certain point in the movie. So of course she had scenes, that she recorded after that point that were supposed to be earlier in the story that we're going to have to match with some of the other stuff for that point in the story. But stuff like that always happens, right? Every single movie, there's going to be some catastrophic nightmare.
Right.
Jared had to go home early because his family contracted COVID. He had to leave.
Oh no.
So that was the funniest thing about that was he came to me and said, "I've got some bad news for you." And I said, "Worse news than Madison losing her voice?" He said, "Yeah, I have to go." But it was okay. I mean, because he had worked so closely with Eric, and because it was at the end of the shoot, Eric just stepped in.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would not be able to even tell, that our DPs switched,
Yeah.
And there's only 2 days left anyway.
Right.
So,
well, I do have another question for you. So, I imagine that you had some frugal like things on the set here, and maybe using some stuff that was maybe not something you can buy off the shelves. And I could be wrong here, but what was the craziest thing that you used on the set of the movie that, may not seem kind of weird to us, but someone who's just not really in the film world would be like, wait, you used a mop for a boom stand? Something like, so what was the craziest thing that you had? And maybe you didn't, but I assume you had something on set like that.
Well, it probably had to do with that visual effect that I'm referring to, because Jared brought his own gear, essentially. I mean, granted, that's not super frugal, but that's an advantage of having relationships, right?
Yeah.
People will bring their own stuff, and if you're friends, they don't bill you for using it. They just, because they want to work on the project,
right?
And so if you can get them in that frame of mind, they're going to do everything they can. It's just it's the same thing. Tyler Hutchins is doing our post-production sound mix.
Awesome.
And he did all those great projects in college, right? And so just mentioning the fact that hey, you think maybe you might want to work on this? I mean, he just jumps all over it. Is super excited and anyway, so that's one reason you go to film school, right? Is you develop these relationships and you're able to use those relationships later, not only just for your stuff, but you'll work on other people's projects in the same way. That's very frugal, right? I mean, you can get great talent and nice gear that way, without even spending anything. Of course, you pay the bill, your student loans and everything, I guess.
Oh yeah, I know.
That way. As far as the craziest thing, like I said, I had to do this visual effect, and I can kind of talk about a little without explaining what it is. Essentially, it was a bed frame with this mattress on it, right? And I had to simulate the ground, with this mattress, and so it was like a memory foam mattress I got for nothing. The bed frame I had to buy, I got on Craigslist for like $50. It was like a solid wood, and I had to make this look like the ground. It was like, it had to be above ground, like 4 feet, and look like the ground on top. And so I ended up staining it, to make it look brown. We threw dirt on top of it and stuff like that to simulate the crawl space. And that was kind of crazy, but I think it's going to look really good. Again,
Would they just have a more controlled environment for whatever stunt you were performing?
Yeah. We had a bunch of scenes in the garage that we were shooting, and after those were all done, we just moved the car out and set that whole thing up in the garage so that, we could mimic the lighting in the crawl space. And of course, in a garage, there's no windows, so you have total control of the lighting. And we essentially made a duplicate of the crawl space. This is like specific part of the crawl space in the garage that we could, move underneath it if we needed to for whatever effects. We had a fog machine and, stuff like that. And, but everything else was pretty standard. Like I didn't have a lot of crazy rigs or anything. Again, Jared brought his own. There was one after he left. There was one that I had built, that's on my channel made out of flash brackets that Eric used. But there was really nothing too outlandish or crazy.
This isn't like super important, but I'm sure Daniel wants to know, and I know I do. What kind of camera did Jared bring what'd you guys shoot on?
Well, he actually didn't bring a camera. We rented one from Lens Rentals, and it was the Sony A7S III, which is a pretty affordable camera. But I wasn't able to buy one, but we rented it, and it was like $300 for 10 days. I mean, that is cheap. Jared did bring an Atmos Ninja recorder, I believe it was, and so we recorded the HDMI output right from the Sony into that. And I actually ended up doing some pickup shots after everybody was gone, and I just rented the camera locally and just shot some pickups, some close-ups, inserts, stuff like that, which also saved us time. It's like we shot everything we had to with the actors, and afterwards I could always do these shots of like a car pulling out of the driveway and a close up of the grass or whatever, stuff like that, which is and again, these cameras are really good. I mean, that's a really good camera.
That's the camera that I'm eyeing right now that I want to personally buy. They're pretty sweet. For those that don't know, what's the best analogy for like what it's like to be on a movie set? The thing I heard from Jared, and I'm not quite sure where he heard this from or if he invented it, whatever. Being on a movie is like going to war, and so that's what I always heard from Jared. So like, do you have an analogy like that too? Or like, what's it like to? I always say we're masochists for making movies. Sure.
I think the best thing I can think of off the top of my head is a quote from Jim Gaffigan, where he said, "Picture yourself drowning, and then someone hands you a baby."
Yes, and
that's
it's your
perfect.
Baby. At least if you're directing, it's your baby. Yeah.
That's right.
No.
Yeah, his analogy for that was like what's it like to have kids or something. But it's it's like you say, filmmaking is a very parental activity,
right?
So.
Oh, man.
So when did you? I guess you're still. Who knows? Maybe you're getting more pickup shots tonight. I guess you can. When did you? I guess wrap officially.
With the actors and crew, the main crew and everything.
Yeah.
That was July 27th, I believe.
Okay, so we're a couple weeks, right?
Yeah, about 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Okay, so I mean, I know this is the point usually after I've wrapped where I'm like, well, I wish I could have done everything differently. or at least this list of things. There's at least one thing that it's like, if I could just get one more shot at that.
Yeah, I was telling my wife that I think every filmmaker has this experience where sometimes this happens during production, but typically it's after, where there's like this huge fit of depression, right? You're just like,
Right.
Did I just make a piece of garbage?
You like don't want to look at the footage. You just feel like that's like a trauma response to watching it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, but then you review stuff and you start editing. You're like, oh, okay, I can see how this could be. I have a pretty good feeling about it, mostly because I think my actors are really good. And like I said, they have really solid chemistry, and that is really exciting to me because, like I said, the movie lives or dies based on this relationship.
There's that old adage that direct or 90% of directing is good casting. Sort of thing. It makes a huge difference for sure.
No,
go on.
I was just going to say, and we had excitement with that too, with casting, because Chris, the actor that I'd basically written this part for, one reason to use him was also because he had all these relationships with these actresses, and he says, I'm gonna provide you with all these options because I know all these people, and we'll have some built-in chemistry, and then they can self-tape. You can see if you like them, and then we'll do kind of a chemistry callback. So it'll be a scene from the movie. You can see how they interact and everything. And so we went through this whole wave of, it wasn't a ton of people, but it was a lot. And casting, as you probably know, is kind of an exhausting experience. And, the person I wanted initially just didn't work out. And then we cast somebody. And then 3 weeks later, she said she had to bow out, after all this. So we had to start over because everybody that we auditioned the first round had commitments now. So we had to start from scratch. Now, actually, I think it worked out for the best because the person we ended up in that part, Madison Bullock, had a really good vulnerable quality. Have you ever noticed some actors you can picture them as they could be a sinister person, right? Or just by looking at them, like Willem Dafoe, right? Look at him, he can play a creepy guy, but he can also play a gentle person, But you can see him going all over the place, right?
Right.
Some actresses or actors, you look at them and they don't seem to have that, scary quality to them, which makes them even scarier, if they go that far in the story, if that's what they're called to do. And so I was happy that I was happy with who we ended up with, even though we went through this kind of horrific double casting, because it was also pressing up against our shoot start, right? Or our start date, which was July 18th, I think was our first day. And the clock was ticking and we needed to find, cast this person. So that was exciting too. But
well, I was going to say, I see on Facebook that you have this mandated release date, April 1st, 2022. That's what it says on Facebook. It will be released. Does that mean it's going to be, you're going to do festivals, or what's your plan now with the movie?
April 1st is kind of tentative as far as that's the latest I think the movie would be released. I see the benefit in festivals, but I don't know how practical that is as far as, because, what Jared and Eric and myself were trying to do is to keep going, right? To make another movie. We had a meeting last night, in fact, about the next movie, which Jared's going to direct.
Wow.
And so for that to be feasible, or for us to generate, hopefully, a budget for that movie, that will be what we can make off of this movie, which means that, a festival run is kind of impractical. Plus, with a festival run or anything like that, kind of a traditional way of getting distributors' attention, I mean, you're talking about a year or two, right, to do that. And you're talking about entry fees, and I think that's a lot. I mean, I can see the advantage of it, and sometimes you can get the attention of distributors that way, but sometimes nothing comes out of it, other than you do get some exposure and you might get some buzz about your movie. But that doesn't mean any distributor is going to knock on your door. So I'm thinking of it as a more proactive way, is to not necessarily self-release, but I've got some connections through Chris and through some other people that I've talked to about distributing it without doing that. But a lot of that also relies upon me, because as you probably noticed on Facebook and Instagram, it's I'm releasing stuff daily. And that's just within the realm of the people that I know on those social media platforms. What I need to do is, leverage my YouTube audience to get them involved. get outside of my main circle of friends, right? The people that I know or who are interested in what I'm doing because they know me, versus, like the Frugal Filmmaker audience, which is granted is a lot smaller, but that's something I need to be doing weekly as well to kind of increase the bubble of, hey, this movie's coming, and if you like the channel, then you might be interested. I'm not asking for money. I'm just asking for, word of mouth, essentially.
Right.
But that's kind of my plan. I've looked into, like I said, Chris has some distribution contacts. I've also been looking into Indie Rights as a distributor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
But Lyndon Nelson has done a lot of stuff on YouTube as far as talking about their distribution model, and so that's kind of what I'm looking at. But I don't, like I said, if I were to do that, which is the goal, I would need to release in the first quarter of next year, probably at the end of January, the latest, because like Indie Rights, for example, will pay you 2 quarters later, and that would be the time when we would be ramping up for production on Jared's movie. So,
So what, are you thinking streaming release? Is that kind of what do you have a do you know where you want to be, or do you know necessarily where you think you might fit in that, or are you just kind of like, whoever wants me, come get me,
Well, and if you're working through a distributor, they have those relationships, right? I'm not looking, I think Netflix is unrealistic. Plus, I'm not a fan of Netflix's model, which is, release your movie and then pay you at the end of the run, which is like 2 years. They don't pay you a dime until the run's over, which doesn't work for me, right? It doesn't work for us pushing a budget into another film.
Is that based on analytics or like how well your movie did, or like is it just like a lump sum?
Yeah, it's just a lump sum. They pay for it outright, whatever you negotiate, right? If they want your movie.
Well, that makes sense to pay at the end then if it's a lump sum. Like that makes no sense at all.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't like that at all. I'm not sure about like the Hulu. Those are all exclusive platforms, I've noticed like Shudder, they picked up a movie that had a lower budget than I did. It's called An Unquiet Grave. Which is an interesting movie, but they were a result of like being on an online festival, and they got noticed and Shudder approached them. I don't know what they made, but there are platforms out there that will come to you and give you exclusive deals, but then your movie's obviously locked up on that specific platform for that X amount of time, whatever it is. But again, I'm not so much a fan of that, unless they have some amazing offer, right? And if you're willing to wait 2 years. I don't know about Hulu and Shudder if they pay you up front or quarterly or whatever. But that's something you got to think about if you want to keep doing this. Like I said, I'm an older person, so I really don't want to be tied up with the same movie for 5 years or whatever. While I want to be making another movie based on what this movie earns.
Right.
So those are all things to consider.
Well, I was gonna kind of ask there, what's your ultimate goals here? Is it just to keep making movies, or is there some type of movie you'd like to make? I know, like, me and Daniel talk about this all the time, and when I talk to people about making a feature or whatever, I say, I know when we make this first feature, we're probably going to just lose a lot of money, and hopefully we'll get to make another one next. So like, I know it sounds like you guys are already talking about this next movie, either rotating directors or whatever. So what's your ultimate, like, okay, I feel like I accomplished what I wanted to do in the filmmaking world?
Well, I probably have a Roger Corman model, which is, he made movies for decades, right? He made them on the cheap. He always made money. Granted, he also made a lot of exploitation, which I'm not interested in.
Right.
And he also had like drive-ins, that's how he distributed all of his stuff. That's why his movies always made money, because he produced them so cheaply and then had all these distribution outlets. I've kind of want to do a similar thing, only I'm trying to up the quality a little bit, keep the ideas, original and interesting. And also the budgets have to be low. That's the only way you're going to really turn a profit doing this, is to keep your budgets as low as possible. And what I mean by low is 20 and under.
Yeah.
And
20 million or 20,000?
8,000.
Yeah. No, not
I was like low.
Yeah. We're talking obviously this is micro budget we're
right.
talking about here. And when you're doing genre stuff too, it's like as soon as you dip your toe into sci-fi or something, unless you're doing conceptual hard sci-fi that doesn't involve production design,
right.
that costs money. And stuff like that. So, but to answer your question, I mean, I would like, I wouldn't mind being, producing other people's stuff. I wouldn't mind say, hey, oh, Donovan, you've got this script, it's a good script. You could probably produce it. Here's a budget, make the movie for this much money.
Yeah.
And hopefully by then, like another goal is to, leverage, get an audience going so that whatever my name is attached to, hopefully there's people out there interested. If it's the Frugal Filmmaker audience, great, and here's a movie that I've produced or written or done, XYZ on. And
Yeah.
I would like to give like other filmmakers with cool ideas, opportunities to make movies just like me. Just like I know if I have a cool idea, I want to make it, I can, hopefully.
Yeah, and that's kind of something that, and this is a little, I'm not sure we should talk about this or not. I don't think it matters, but it's something that we talk about a lot, me and Daniel, is that, hey, we're doing this podcast every week. We're also releasing nerdy type content that's bite-sized, and we're trying to make longer format, potentially that things could go a little more viral, so to speak, and hitting things at all these different social media places. And the idea is that maybe one day we'll have a smaller audience and say, hey, you guys enjoyed this. Now, would you help, either just eyeballs or word of mouth or whatever, help us make in some form these other bigger projects? And it's all about, like you said, like, hey, me and Daniel are kind of building a network down here of people we talk to and also people we've worked with in the past. And, the old saying is that, all tides or high tide raises all ships or something like that. I'm butchering the phrase, but no, it's the same idea. And I think it's, it's super important, especially a lot of people think that, you just, make a movie and, that's it. And you go to the next thing. It's like, well, you need these relationships. And that's like the most valuable thing probably that college can give you is these relationships. And that kind of brings me to one of my final questions here is, what advice do you have to filmmakers that say that I need this really expensive red or Ari Alexa or something to make a movie, or I need $500,000 or $20 million to make a movie? What's your advice to them to say you don't need those things and get off your ass and just make the movie?
Well, I mean, people have said, not just me or you, or tons of people have always said, just get off your butt and do it. I mean, I will admit, a feature can be a daunting looking thing.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a huge mountain. Like, how can I possibly do that? Even though, lots of people have done it, and there's been a lot worse movies out there that have been made and completed, right? With people with less talent than you, people with less money than you, people with less gear than you, that have had distribution deals and stuff like that. It's hard. I'm the first one to admit, it's hard to be motivated to do this sometimes. That's why I worked with these guys. Actually kind of gave me deadlines, and things like that. They're like, okay, we're going to meet in 2 weeks and you need to have 15 more pages by then. And I knew that this window of time was, in the summer was coming. And if we wanted to do it this year, I had to have a script done so that I could, because obviously if you want to draw people to your project, you have to have a screenplay that sings, right? That resonates with them in some way. I don't care what genre it is. I mean, it has to be halfway decent, to get them excited about it, especially if you're shipping it off. Like for me, I, had, given it, to Chris, who actually, he didn't tell me this, he gave it to his brother, who was a screenwriter, and said, what do you think of this? Should I get involved with this? And it came back with a good review, fortunately for me. So, and, in writing, obviously critical, but also it's the cheapest thing you're going to do, right? I mean, writing costs nothing. All you need is, a computer or pad of paper or whatever. Just start writing. And granted, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. But again, collaborate with people, bounce ideas off them, whether they're your friends or, colleagues at school or work or whatever. But if you can get a good script, I mean, that's the foundation of any great movie. And you will have a much easier time attaching other people to it if they get excited about it. That's one goal of mine is always to hand a script to somebody and have them read it and say, oh, I have to be a part of this, right? Because it hits them in some way that gets them excited. So that's important. But even us, right? We've all had film school experience. So we know how to do this stuff to some degree, but still a feature can be really intimidating. When really after you've written it, it's not as intimidating as you once thought. I think there's sort of a mystique, with features like that, is that these are these big, monsters that are going to devour your life, and you can't possibly do it because it's just so so tough to overcome, but it's not impossible. It's just like, shooting it in 10 days. Like, yeah, that's a huge obstacle to overcome. But once you're through it, I mean, you're through it, and you just keep going. So you sort of have to visualize it like that. That's not impossible, but you should also give yourself some kind of a deadline, right? I mean, I'm way more motivated because I'm older. I know that, I'm not 20 years old. I can't go to Hollywood and live in my car and try and sell a screenplay.
Right.
Or I don't have the luxury like what you were talking about, like, oh, if I can just, scrimp and save for 5 years, then I'll have the budget I finally want. I mean, I kind of have the feeling right now that when people see this movie, they might say something like, and we've all said this about movies, right? Where it's like, oh, if they only had, a little more money, they could have made it better. They could have perfected it, or they took more time on the screenplay. It's like, but if you don't have that time or you don't have that money, then what? Do you just not do it?
Right.
Or do you say, well, I'm going to take what I have and do the best that I can with it and get it done? To me, that's, I think, I don't know. For me, as somebody that wants to produce more than one movie in my lifetime, that's the attitude you have to have. Versus like, well, I'm going to do this one script and I'm going to perfect it over 10 years, and then I'm going to raise the money for another 10 years and then I'm going to make it and it'll be perfect. And it might be, you might be able to produce that one great film, but then you have one film that you produced in your life, and maybe you missed the opportunity to make a bunch of movies, a body of work versus just one movie.
And also there's just even the additive, I'd say, advantage of, at least hopefully the idea would be that you make a movie, and if you make another one, your newest one will be a little bit better than the previous one, because you're going to learn from all the things you did previously, and of course things are going to happen that are be out of your control, but the idea would be it'll be better. And if you're waiting 10 years or you're waiting, or excuses or whatever, then you won't get that experience. Now you could come out of the gate a Steven Spielberg, like you're like, oh, you're great or whatever, or whoever favors whatever director you like. But the odds are that, you're not. And that's just, Steven Spielberg didn't come out Steven Spielberg. You know what I mean? I don't think he did. Yeah. He had to work at it.
I think it's common knowledge, right, that the first things we try are usually awful, right?
Right, yeah.
Think about like your first movie that you ever made or your first thing you wrote. I mean, wasn't that good? If you look back, but that's okay. That's okay, because you learn, like you say, you learn from every project. And I think the more projects you do, the better you're going to become. Is my belief. So just keep doing it. Just don't stop, because it's so easy to get, apathetic and lazy and stuck in a rut because you don't have an Alexa or whatever. You don't have 1,000 friends you can do that epic battle scene with, or
right. Well, I think there's something there too, just about just not stopping. I think you kind of mentioned a minute ago about or earlier in the podcast about these other YouTubers in the time, they were putting out content and then stopping. And also you were kind of in the period where YouTube was just exploding. So, like this time period, but I think even people now who, I'm not going to say that demand instant gratification, but maybe demand instant gratification. Like I lean that way more towards that than Daniel does. 'Cause I'm like, we're making this content and I want more subscribers than we have, X, Y, and Z. But there's still that idea that I have to every day say, okay, it's not a short game, it's a long game. And that it's about consistency. It's not even about quality all the time. It's about consistency. It's about building relationships, not being an asshole. And it's about trying to always be better in the next thing. I think that will lend success.
Yeah. I agree. And also, another critical piece we really haven't talked. We talked a little bit about it, but marketing.
Sure.
You gotta generate an audience to your film, where you have to get the word out to more than just your family and friends. If you want to make money, if you're just doing this because it's your art and you're fine with just having it shown to your family and friends, that's fine. But if you're trying to create a model that allow you to fund movie after movie after movie, I mean, you need to start thinking about that. Like even before you've written anything, it's like, how am I going to get the word out about this? So it'll be interesting to see, like, because I mean, right now, like I said, I'm releasing stuff every day, like pictures from the shoot, which is what I have the most of right now.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see, because these companies, the distributors will do zero marketing for you. They might create a poster, but they are not going to do any social media marketing. You can hire somebody to do that, or you can do it yourself. I mean, even PR, there's a PR company that I'm thinking of working with, all they are going to do really is do press releases and connect me with other podcasters, or try to get invites to other means of talking about the movie, but they don't do social media either.
Yeah.
So, and that's obviously a huge part of it.
That's one thing I'll say, and I'm not. This is me not saying we're experts in any of the way, shape, or form. But me and Daniel both, I still work there, Agency 501 in Little Rock. We've at least dipped our toes in this idea of multi-platform marketing, and it's invaluable. And it's one of those things like I feel like I know about 5% of the whole grand scheme of things, but there's just so much there and so many different paths to take. And I truly think that to be successful in like the YouTube market or whatever, you really got to hit it. You really do in Instagram, TikTok, everything. And it's like and there's also you're fighting the algorithm, and then also there's specific types of content work best for whatever platform, of course, and they only work for so long also. So it's a puzzle piece, and it's a complicated one. But I think me and Daniel have a stronger grasp than most, but I still think that grasp is very, it's ever changing, but I think it's something that people have to adapt to for 100%.
Well, and that's a full-time job in and of itself, right? I mean, like we were
Crazy.
talking about crowdfunding earlier. I mean, that's why Hollywood has they have marketing departments, right? That's all they do is market, and guys like us, are expected to not only generate the content, but also get the word out about it. And that's like 2 full-time jobs on top of whatever job you have that's outside of all this,
Right.
So
I think it's complicated. Well, Scott, I really appreciate you having us or being on the podcast, and I would love I can't talk half the time. It's also 10 o'clock here, so I'm tired. But I appreciate you being on the podcast. And how can our listeners, how can they follow Bad Bones or follow you, Frugal, the Frugal Filmmaker himself?
Well, I've also, discovered a lot about hashtag marketing. Hashtag Bad Bones Movie is the one that I started. So if you search just on Google for hashtag Bad Bones Movie, you'll come up with all the, it'll lead you right to Facebook. It'll lead you to Instagram, Twitter a little bit. But that's probably, one thing I thought was interesting was that, a hashtag doesn't cost anything, versus like, oh, I'm going to create a website that'll be about the movie. Well, then you got to purchase a domain name, and then you have to, generate content for the website, and you have to keep it updated. Where a hashtag, you can generate content anywhere and then hashtag it. And then granted, it's more of a scattershot approach, right? It's kind of all out there all at once versus some kind of organized format. But yeah, that's how you can learn more about the movie. Also, my YouTube channel, The Frugal Filmmaker, a little bit. I need to start generating episodes about the movie. So that's probably my largest platform, right? Even though it's been dormant for a while, and I haven't been able to utilize it yet. So.
No, there's something I would personally just would like to see. It's just like small, however long videos, whatever, of just like the process making the movie, maybe from every department. I think that'd be really cool. Just A, I like filmmaking, and B, I want to know more about your movie. That's a really cool idea. It's just kind of that I think would generate a lot of interest.
Yeah, if you can create videos that people will want to see that tie into your movie somehow, like you say, here's how we did this XYZ thing. And then it's as a side benefit, you're also talking about the movie at the same time.
Right. It's backdoor marketing. It's
stuff I should be doing. Yeah, because I'm one person.
It's hard, man. We fight the battle every day. It feels like. But Daniel, how can our listeners write into us?
Listeners, you can write into us at bit.ly/241mail. bit.ly/241mail. There, let us know your best guess about the plot of Bad Bones. just throw something against the wall. I don't care. I mean, I would assume you might incorporate bones somehow.
Good.
I don't know. And apparently a bed that looks like a floor. Just kind of something there. So yeah, bit.ly/241mail. Sure, let us know.
Of course, if you can't hit us up at our Bitly, you can always comment below. youtube.com/2for1studios. Of course, if you want more 2for1, go to 2for1studios.com. There we house all of our cool 2for1 content that releases on a weekly basis. Scott, thank you again so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks. Thank you.
I love talking to filmmakers, and it's we talk about all kinds of things. Typically, it lends to nerdy stuff and TV and movies, whatever. But I think my favorite things is talk to either script writing or to filmmakers themselves, people who've done the process and they're in the middle of a project or have something pending. So I think it's just a great thing to do on the podcast. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time out, especially with the time zone change and working with us here. But I really appreciate it. And as always, my name is Donovan Thompson.
I'm Daniel Wingfield.
I'm Scott Eggleston.
And we have spoken.